The Civil War, North and South, Part 1. The South during the Civil War was called the Confederate States of America, or simply the Confederacy, or the CSA. Here's a map that shows the Confederate States of America. It consisted of 11 states of the Deep South. But how many stars does the Confederate flag have? 13. So, why does the Confederate flag have 13 stars if there were only 11 states in the Confederate States of America? The reason is that the Confederacy falsely claimed 2 additional states, Missouri and Kentucky, both labeled border states on the map. The Confederates claimed them as Confederate states, but they never seceded and never joined the Confederacy. And so that's why the Confederate flag has 13 stars, but only 11 states. What was the capital of the Confederate States of America? Richmond, Virginia. Here is the Capitol building of the state of Virginia. It was designed by Thomas Jefferson. We looked at this building when we talked about Thomas Jefferson. But for 4 years during the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, it was the capital of a foreign nation, the Confederate States of America. Who was the president of the Confederate States of America? Jefferson Davis. When you see pictures of Jefferson Davis from the war, his face is always turned so that you can only see one eye. And the reason is that his left eye, Davis suffered from a lacerated cornea, and it was very ugly during the war, and so it's always turned away from the camera so that you can't see it. This is the White House of the Confederacy in Richmond, Virginia. It doesn't look that spectacular from the outside, but it really is quite elaborate inside and has been beautifully restored. When my Civil War travel study class visited the White House of the Confederacy, there was a reenactor there, a costumed interpreter, portraying Jefferson Davis. The interesting thing about this reenactor, though, is he is not in any way, shape, or manner affiliated with the White House of the Confederacy. He's simply a visitor who comes and pays his admission fee every morning, buys a ticket, goes in, and harangues the guest. And he's kind of an embarrassment to the White House of the Confederacy. And what is this? Did you guess the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C.? I was hoping you would. It is in fact the Jefferson Davis Monument in Kentucky, where Jefferson Davis was born. And who was the Vice President of the Confederacy? A man named Alexander H. Stephens from Georgia. More about him in a couple minutes. Back to the Confederate flag. This is actually not the national flag of the Confederate States of America. It is a regimental battle flag of the Confederacy, but it was not the national flag of the Confederate States of America. This is the original flag of the Confederate States of America, known as the Stars and Bars. 7 states for the original 7 states to secede from the Union, and 3 stripes. But there was a problem with this flag. It looks too much like the American flag, and in the heat of battle you can't tell the 2 flags apart. And so the Confederates went back to the drawing board and designed their second national flag. This is the second national flag of the Confederate States of America. It has the St. Andrew's cross, but just in the corner. Well, there was a problem with this flag as well. In the heat of battle and the fog of war, it can look like a surrender flag. Imagine if this flag gets wrapped around the flagpole a couple times, it becomes a surrender flag. And so it was back to the drawing board again for the third national flag of the Confederate States of America. This is the third and final flag of the Confederate States of America, the St. Andrew's cross in the corner, and a red stripe at the end. Often you will hear people say that the South, or the Confederacy, fought the Civil War not for slavery, but for states' rights. I think that's false. It's a bunch of BS. Consider this advertisement for a book of primary sources on the Confederacy. Let's zero in a little bit. Most Americans hold basic misconceptions about the Confederacy, the Civil War, and the actions of subsequent neo-Confederates. For example, 2/3 of Americans, including most history teachers, think the Confederate States seceded for states' rights. This error persists because most have never read the key documents about the Confederacy. And I say amen to that. I agree completely. And that's why I have assigned some of the key primary documents of the Confederacy for your final reading assignment of the semester. States' rights was not an end in itself. It was the means to an end. And what was the end in question? Slavery. States' rights was a theory that the South used to protect the institution of slavery. States' rights was the means with which Southerners tried to protect the ends, slavery. For states' rights to have been the cause of the war, Southerners should have defended it and upheld it at all times. They should have defended states' rights consistently. But they didn't. Whenever states' rights conflicted with slavery, Southerners forgot all about states' rights. They always chose slavery over states' rights. The best example of this would be the Fugitive Slave Law. The Fugitive Slave Law was a federal law requiring Northerners to return runaway slaves back to their masters in the South. Stolen property must be returned to its rightful owners. Well, a lot of Northerners didn't like the Fugitive Slave Law, and they didn't want to obey it. They practiced civil disobedience. Some Northern states went even further than that. Some Northern states passed state laws called personal liberty laws that said the particular Northern state declares the federal Fugitive Slave Law to be null and void. Pennsylvania did this. Pennsylvania passed a personal liberty law that said the citizens of Pennsylvania do not need to obey the federal Fugitive Slave Law. Pennsylvania declared null and void the federal Fugitive Slave Law within the borders of Pennsylvania. Well, when Southerners heard about this, Northern states nullifying the federal Fugitive Slave Law, the Southern states became enraged, and they demanded that an almighty federal government force the Northern states to return runaway slaves back to the South. Now, do you see any irony in that? If Southerners really believed in states' rights, they would not have questioned the right of Northern states to refuse to return runaway slaves. That's the best evidence I can give you that this law is not about states' rights. It's about slavery. And by the way, all that talk about states' rights, it really arose after the war was over. After the war was over, the South was embarrassed that it fought a war for slavery, and it did a little revisionist history, a little spin control. After the war was over, the South created this mythology called the Lost Cause mythology, which basically said, we were not eager secessionists, we were reluctant secessionists, forced out of the Union by a war of Northern aggression. And we didn't fight for slavery. No, we fought for states' rights. The problem with that argument is if you go back to the war and look at what the South actually said during the war, they did say they were fighting for slavery, not states' rights. let me offer you a couple smoking guns. A speech given by the Confederate Vice President Alexander H. Stephens in 1861. In this speech, Stephens said the following: "The Confederate States of America is founded upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, and that slavery is the Negro's natural and moral condition." Anything about states' rights there? No. Another smoking gun. A newspaper called the Mercury from Charleston, South Carolina, wrote the following in 1865. "It was on account of encroachments upon the institution of slavery that South Carolina seceded from the Union." Anything about states' rights there? No. It's all about slavery. This war was not about states' rights, it was about slavery. So the South seceded from the Union and went to war to protect slavery, not states' rights. Keep in mind, however, that 3/4 of Southern whites did not own slaves. They were too poor. So why would the non-slaveholders of the South fight a war to preserve slavery when they didn't even own slaves? Well, even the non-slaveholders of the South wanted to preserve slavery. For two reasons. First, remember the Southern version of the American dream. Today's non-slaveholder is tomorrow's slaveholder. Even if you don't own slaves, you aspire to hit the big time someday and become a slaveholder. But even if you never own slaves, you still support the institution of slavery. Because slavery gave all white status, no matter how low, no matter how poor. If you're white, there's a whole group of people below you, the slaves. Some Southerners even went so far as to argue that true liberty and equality for white people can only exist if there is slavery for blacks, because slavery makes all whites equal. So even the non-slaveholders of the South got some benefit out of slavery. Not much, but some. So all Southern whites liked slavery and wanted to preserve it. But the real question for the South is this: just how far were the non-slaveholders of the South willing to go to keep an institution that gave them benefits, but only limited benefits? Let's face it, for the South to win the Civil War, the non-slaveholders were going to have to win it, because they were 3/4 of the Southern white population. How high of a price were the non-slaveholders willing to pay to save the institution of slavery? There was a limit to how far they would go, and in the end it wasn't quite far enough. In the end, the non-slaveholders were willing to go only so far to save the institution of slavery, and it wasn't quite far enough. Now I'm about to offer an internal explanation of why the South lost the Civil War, an internal explanation that is valid. Remember the definition of internal and external explanations of the war's outcome. An external explanation would be something the North did right to win the war, versus an internal explanation, which is something that the South did wrong to lose the war.